Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back once again. Friends, the story we're about to explain today is an Oscar-winning one, and it's been remade and released in various countries. So let's dive in and find out what's special about the story. We start with a girl named Susan, whom we see waiting for her boyfriend at a station. She waits for a long time, but he doesn't show up, and in the process, she misses her train. Soon, Susan realizes that not all promises are meant to be fulfilled. Some people break them and leave. Saddened and alone, she steps out of the station and starts walking down the street, feeling miserable. As she walks, she stops at a shop, buys a cold drink, and heads out. After walking for a while, she suddenly remembers that she paid for the drink, but left it behind. She returns to the shop, where at the gate, she bumps into a strange-looking man holding the very can of the drink she had bought. At first, she looks inside the shop and sees no one at the counter and no sign of her drink. Assuming the man had taken it, she grabs the can from his hand, drinks it, and walks away, leaving the man standing there in shock but saying nothing. After this, she gets on a bus and realizes she left her wallet at the shop. She returns again, and the cashier hands her the wallet, saying, "Madam, you left this here." It is then that she realizes the can she drank actually belonged to the man she had bumped into. Feeling guilty, she looks for him, but he's already gone. Later, she goes back home, and the next morning we see her having breakfast with her family, though no one says much to her. After breakfast, she heads to her dad's construction site, but doesn't step outside due to the dust. Her dad is the CEO of a well-known construction company in the city and is very hands-on with his work. As she watches from a distance, two men are arguing. One of them is named Johnny, a worker who is also studying architecture. The manager tells Susan's dad, Mr. Park, that Johnny is refusing to pour concrete because he believes the site isn't strong enough to handle the load. Mr. Park asks Johnny for his name, to which Johnny, clearly frustrated, responds that he's told him his name many times before and storms off, leaving Mr. Park displeased. As this happens, Susan recognizes Johnny as the guy she took the drink from the previous night. Her dad arrives and Johnny leaves. In the next scene, we learn that Susan is a fashion designer, but her office is under renovation and facing delays. Frustrated, she calls her dad for help, as she has no other option left. He agrees to send someone over but warns her not to talk much with the person, as he is quite rude. A while later, the man arrives, and it turns out to be Johnny. Susan tries to hide, but Johnny doesn't even seem to notice her. Perhaps he doesn't recognize her. He starts checking the walls, while Susan drinks a cold drink. Johnny suddenly walks up to her and, just like the previous night, takes the drink from her hand and drinks it right in front of her. This time, she says nothing. After his work is done, everyone is about to leave when a thief snatches Susan's purse and runs away. Johnny sees this, opens his car door in the thief's path, causing him to trip and get caught. Johnny returns Susan's purse and she thanks him, though he doesn't respond. Since his car hasn't arrived, Susan offers to give him a ride home. His car is in terrible shape, but Susan doesn't mind, and the ride home goes smoothly. Before leaving, Susan apologizes for the previous night, but Johnny, as usual, ignores her. Despite Johnny's cold attitude, Susan starts developing feelings for him and waits for him at her office for several days. But he doesn't show up. Determined, she even visits his construction site, but feels awkward among so many workers, so she leaves. However, that same night, she goes to the place where Johnny and his friends are drinking. She intentionally walks past him, trying to get his attention. All the workers notice her, but Johnny remains indifferent, forcing her to approach him. They all sit together, drink, and chat, with Johnny and Susan sitting side by side. At one point, Johnny offers her a drink, saying, "If you drink this, we'll be clean forever." Susan asks, "And if I don't?" To which Johnny replies, "Then the opposite." She drinks the drink, and they share a kiss, marking the beginning of their love story, a story that brought tears to the eyes of many. From this point on, they spend a lot of time together, having fun. Susan never makes Johnny feel like he's just a worker for her dad. One day, Susan's dad notices how happy she looks and asks her what's going on. She tries to brush it off, but he presses further and she finally admits that she's in love with an architect. Her dad, surprised but supportive, asks when he'll get to meet this man. Susan laughs and blushes. When Susan meets Johnny, she tells him that her dad wants to meet him, but Johnny refuses. He knows what the real motive behind the meeting is and doesn't want to face the humiliation. He tells Susan, "You're a princess. Your dad has everything, and I don't even have a house. Yes, I love you, but no one will accept us." Susan tries to convince him, but Johnny, being practical, knows that this isn't like the movies. He leaves, and although Susan doesn't give up, Johnny keeps his distance. One day, Johnny has an interview, and Susan personally designs a blazer for him to wear. After the interview, he finds Susan waiting for him outside, and they go to dinner together. Suddenly, Susan's family shows up, shocking her. Her dad says, "You invited us, didn't you?" It turns out that this was Susan's plan, but Johnny wasn't aware. Johnny remains quiet throughout the dinner, sensing that something isn't right. After dinner, Susan steps outside to get some fresh air, and while she's gone, Mr. Park confronts Johnny, saying, "I've recognized you." He then begins to question Johnny, asking about his family. Johnny admits that he's an orphan and has no home. Mr. Park criticizes him, saying that in the future, he should make sure to date someone of his own social standing. Johnny listens quietly and, after apologizing, promises never to see Susan again. At that moment, Susan collapses outside, and her sister rushes to help. Johnny quickly takes her to the hospital, where the doctors say that stress caused her collapse. When Susan regains consciousness, she hugs Johnny and cries. Her parents witness this and realize that the two are meant to be together. Finally, they agree to their marriage, and soon the day arrives when they tie the knot. Both Susan and Johnny are overjoyed because they've finally achieved their dreams. Johnny has now become a successful architect with a degree and a good job. Everyone, including Susan's dad, has accepted him. One day, while Johnny is at work, Mr. Park introduces him to a businessman who wants Johnny to design a luxury farmhouse. Johnny agrees, and the next day, he presents his model, which everyone loves, securing him the contract. Mr. Park is proud and has a private conversation with Johnny, making Susan emotional, as this was all she ever wanted. But now, a new twist enters the story. One night, when Susan returns home, she forgets which house is hers and enters the wrong one by mistake. Fortunately, she finds Johnny inside and embraces him. However, this isn't the first time something like this has happened recently. Worried, she goes to the doctor the next day and explains her symptoms. The doctor asks if she's fainted recently, and Susan recounts the night she collapsed. The doctor asks her to come back for tests the following week. Meanwhile, Johnny is busy at work, but when Susan visits him, he drops everything to spend time with her. Susan, however, doesn't tell him about her doctor visit, not wanting to worry him. She thinks it's just something minor. The following week, Susan goes to the clinic, where the doctor asks her simple questions like her sister's birth date and the color of the stoplight. But shockingly, Susan can't answer any of them. She undergoes a series of tests and returns to her office, where she unexpectedly runs into her ex. This is the same man she was once going to run away with, but he betrayed her. Now, recently divorced, he asks Susan to run away with him again. She refuses, telling him that she's already moved on with her life. Back at home, Susan and Johnny spend quality time together. One day, while gluing a photo, Susan goes to the fridge for water, but forgets why she was gluing the picture. Johnny, noticing this, asks her what the doctor said. Susan admits that she had visited the doctor but downplays the issue, saying that it's just due to lack of sleep. A few days later, we see Susan at the clinic again, where the doctor reveals the diagnosis. She has Alzheimer's disease. Shocked, Susan asks what that means. The doctor explains that Alzheimer's causes a person to slowly forget their past, present, and future. Over the course of a few years, people with Alzheimer's forget their loved ones, their friends, and eventually, even themselves. Susan, laughing nervously, says, "Doctor, I'm only 27. How can this be happening to me?" The doctor replies that Alzheimer's can affect anyone, regardless of age. As Susan leaves the clinic, Tears streamed down her face. Everything in her life was going well, and now this devastating news. How will she cope? When she gets home, she doesn't tell Johnny about it. Instead, she simply says that she wants to quit her job because she no longer feels motivated. Johnny doesn't mind, so he agrees. The next day, Suzanne stays home and tries to work, but over time, her health starts to decline. She begins to forget basic things. Once, she even packed rice in both of Johnny's lunchboxes. Johnny is puzzled but grows concerned about her health, so he goes straight to her doctor. The doctor reveals the truth, which enrages Johnny, and he gets into a physical altercation with the doctor. Other doctors intervene, separating them. One of them tells Johnny that the doctor's wife had the same disease and that he has treated thousands of Alzheimer's patients. Doctor says, "Suzanne has the same Alzheimer's that my wife had. Slowly, she will forget everything." Johnny is heartbroken and begins to cry. Later, Suzanne goes out to buy some things, but her condition worsens and she collapses. A police officer helps her up and asks, "Ma'am, where do you need to go?" But Suzanne can't remember why she's outside or where her home is. Just then, Charles, her ex, arrives. She recognizes him and leaves with him. Charles tells Suzanne that he wants things to go back to how they were 2 years ago. Suzanne says, being confused, "We didn't even meet 2 years ago." Suzanne has forgotten all the time they spent together, but she still feels like they were in a relationship. Suddenly, she remembers that Johnny is her husband, and Charles doesn't matter anymore. She quickly grabs a taxi and leaves. Meanwhile, Johnny keeps calling Suzanne, but someone else answers, saying they found the phone on the street. Johnny rushes home, where he finds Suzanne. Her eyes are filled with tears as she tells him, "Soon, I'll forget you. Our love will fade. It's better for you to leave." Johnny says, "I know you'll forget everything, but I'll remember. We'll start fresh every day." They embrace and cry, knowing that their future will be tough, but Johnny refuses to give up. He sticks notes all around the house, so Suzanne won't struggle to find things, even making her an ID card to remind her who she is. One day, Suzanne asks Johnny to come home early, and he smiles and leaves. A few hours later, Charles arrives at the door. Suzanne, thinking he is Johnny, invites him in and behaves just as she would with Johnny. Charles suggests they go somewhere together, and as he touches her cheek, he starts to lead her away. Just then, Johnny arrives and, seeing Charles, starts fighting him. Suzanne, thinking Johnny is attacking her husband, faints on the spot. Suzanne's parents arrive and, seeing Charles injured, immediately send him to the hospital. Inside, they talk to Johnny, who explains Suzanne's condition. Parents say, "You can't take care of her alone anymore. She'll come with us." Suzanne appears, but she suddenly urinates right there. Johnny quickly removes his shirt and cleans her feet. Suzanne has lost control of her body and doesn't even realize what she's doing. She has forgotten Johnny's name and can no longer recognize him. This devastates Johnny, who cries bitterly, but there's nothing he can do. Sometimes, Suzanne remembers bits and pieces, and when she does, she cries. One day, while alone at home, she writes a letter to Johnny. "Dear Johnny, you've taken such good care of me, but I don't want to ruin your life because of me. You're a great husband, but I don't want to hurt you anymore." She leaves the letter and walks out of the house. When Johnny returns home that night, he finds the letter and is completely shattered. But he is determined to find her, no matter what. In the meantime, Mr. Park shows Johnny divorce papers that Suzanne signed before she left, but Johnny tears them up. Johnny searches everywhere for Suzanne, filing a missing persons report, but she's nowhere to be found. Days pass, and Johnny feels more and more alone. He misses her every day. Finally, after some time, Johnny receives a letter from Suzanne. She writes, "After so many days, I remembered you today, so I thought I'd let you know." Johnny breaks down, but then he notices the address from where the letter was sent. He rushes to the hospital, where a nurse leads him inside. She tells him that Suzanne has been forgetting more and more, sometimes not even remembering if she's wearing clothes. Johnny sees a photo of himself in Suzanne's room. The nurse explains that Suzanne tore up all her pictures but kept this one. Johnny realizes she's been trying to draw his sketch, but can't complete it. Johnny, softly, says it's nice to see you. Suzanne, puzzled, asks, "Do I know you?" Tears well up in Johnny's eyes, and he puts on sunglasses to hide them. Before leaving, Johnny asks the nurse to bring Suzanne somewhere the next day. The scene shifts to the store where Johnny and Suzanne first met. He recreates their first encounter, with everyone present. As Suzanne looks around, she tearfully asks, "Is this heaven?" She suddenly remembers everything. But how long will this last? The doctor warned Johnny that memories could return for a while but would fade again, just like his wife's did after 3 hours. Johnny doesn't waste a moment. For those 3 precious hours, he stays with Suzanne, taking her for a drive and spending the happiest moments with her. This story may have ended, but it teaches us that nothing is permanent. Cherish every moment you have because tomorrow is uncertain. Thank you.